Thanks, Jean. Can you remind me before I get started where the presenter notes button is?
Yes, that's in the bottom right corner to the right of chat.
Thank you.
And it's PPT notes. Good.
All right, great, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Hannah Betesh. I'm a Senior Associate at APT, and I'm a member of the NARS Virtual Conference Planning Committee. This is the last NARS Virtual Workshop of 2020, and many of our earlier workshops in this series did a deep dive on individual systems and programs that are serving children and families, including how they've been responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of those systems and programs that we've discussed in other workshops are working with families who may also be involved in the criminal justice and juvenile justice systems. And so today I think we have what will be a great panel of people discussing both research and practice in cross-systems collaboration to serve justice-involved clients. So we'll start today with a few webinar housekeeping reminders from Jean Goodman in APT's IT department, and then Asaf Glosser, who chairs the NARS Virtual Conference Planning Committee, will provide a little bit of background on NARS and on the virtual conference. And then I'd like to do some quick polling to understand more about who our audience members are before we move on to our moderated discussion, and then I hope we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So Jean, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. So as Hannah said, this is Jean Goodman. I'm providing IT along with my colleague David Stevens for this meeting, so you can contact us if you're having problems. First thing I'd like to point out is if you're hearing me okay, wonderful. If you're having any problems, you can click on the down arrow to the right of the mute button and choose Switch Audio to change your audio connection method. Also, if we would love for you to participate, if you can use the Q&A panel that should be on the right side of your screen, you can type in a question and all of the panelists will receive it and we will address those questions as time allows. Finally, if you would like to change the display of your screen, you can click on a display icon. It appears at the very top right of the slides. It looks a little bit like a square or a rectangle with little dots on the top. You can change that to various views that you prefer. If you're having any technical problems, feel free to put those in the Q&A as well. With that, I will hand it back to Hannah.
All right, and you can actually hand it to Asaf to talk about NARS and the virtual conference.
Great. So as Hannah said, this is Asaf Glosser at MEF Associates. And as the co-chair of the NARS Virtual Workshop Committee, along with Lauren Antello at the Administration for Children and Families, I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to this last session in the year's NARS Virtual Series. So NARS, the National Association for Welfare Research and Statistics, holds in-person conferences every other year where human services researchers, practitioners, and policymakers come together to talk about their work and how it can inform policy and practice. Several years ago, NARS began holding virtual events in years when the conference wasn't occurring. These events represent an opportunity to keep the NARS community engaged and to highlight interesting research and trends. This year's virtual series has taken on an expanded role as in-person workshops and convenings are not possible. NARS and the Virtual Workshop Committee worked hard to find ways to keep our community engaged. As an organization that strives to sit at the intersection of policy, research, and practice, this virtual series has been an opportunity to hear from all sorts of different folks about the work they're doing and how they're adapting to our changing world. So before turning it back over to Hannah, I just want to remind folks that there are recordings of prior virtual series events, and you can see those at nars.org. These include sessions about how TANF and SNAP agencies are responding to COVID, a session on machine learning and human services programs, a two-part series on the Family First Prevention Act, and a session of research on child welfare services during COVID. So we've covered a lot of territory over the past few months. We're also hard at work planning more events for 2021. So please keep an eye out on the NARS Twitter feed, which is at NARS Workshop, and our website, again, nars.org, for more information. We're also recording this webinar, and it'll get posted to the NARS site in the days to come. I want to just reiterate some appreciation to APT for sponsoring this session, and you can learn more about APT and the work they do at aptassociates.com. And now I'll turn it back over to Hannah to keep things going.
Great, thank you, Asaf. So we have, again, what I think is a really excellent group of presenters today. I'm very excited that you all could join us, and very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'll give each panelist a chance to introduce themselves and briefly describe their work. We'll start with AshLee Smith from the University of Minnesota. AshLee, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is I'm a PhD candidate policy from the and my dissertation research really digs into understanding the experiences of mothers involved in multiple systems, such as child protection and the criminal justice system. So for my project, which I'll talk more about later on, I interviewed 55 moms across the U.S. and spent a little over a year as a guardian ad litem, which is a volunteer advocate for children in the foster care system in Hennepin County in Minneapolis. So happy to be here.
Thank you, AshLee. Next we have Edward Sajor from the Ventura County, California Human Services Agency. Edward, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed, and I am the administrator for the reentry programs we have here in Ventura County, which is in Southern California. I'll be talking about the STEPS program, which stands for Specialized Training, Employment, and Employment Program for Success, and it works with, we partner with the probation office here in Ventura County, and they send us over justice-involved clients. We've been doing this program for over 10 years, and it has spawned 5 other justice-involved programs, so that's what I'll be talking about.
Thank you. And then we have collaborators from Maryland. So we'll start with Walter Jackson from the Prince George's County Child, Adult, and Family Services Division.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Walter Jackson, the Assistant Director for Child, Adult, and Family Services, which is a responsibility for all child welfare programs, which includes foster care and adoptions, child protective services, in-home services, Ready by 21, all licensing, recruitment, and retention of foster parents, as well as all of those services programs. We started work several years ago with the Department of Human Services, Department of Juvenile Services, the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University, as well as the Prince George's County Court System to implement a crossover youth practice model.
Great, thank you. And then also from Maryland, we have Kwabena Tuffour from the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. I work for the state of Maryland, Department of Juvenile Services, as the Metro Intake Director. I oversee the intake unit in 2 counties, Prince George's County and also in Montgomery County. And the intake unit is where we screen cases to decide which cases should go to court and which cases that we can handle informally.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and hearing what you have to say. Before we get into that, we want to do a series of audience polls to figure out who everybody else on the webinar is. So you should be able to see coming up on the side some poll questions, and I'll read them aloud here. So first, I want to find out what type of organization you work for. And your options are state or local government agency, nonprofit or community-based organization, college or university, other research organization, or something else. So we'll give people a few minutes or another minute or so to put in answers. Jean, how are those coming? Are you able to see those? All right. Looks like we have some coming in. Okay. So what are we seeing here? Let's see. We have, oh, this is great. We have a really good mix. 38% state and local government agency. So that's our biggest one. We have 25% from other research organizations, 20% from nonprofit or community-based organizations, 9% from colleges or universities, and then 7% something else. That's great. That's I think exactly what we were hoping for, is a good cross-section to talk about these kinds of collaborations. And then for our next audience poll question, we'd like to hear what you're most interested in hearing about today. Examples and benefits of cross-system collaboration, the role of cross-system collaborations during COVID-19, or strategies for reducing multi-systems involvement. So give everybody about a minute to respond. All right. Seeing responses come in. Okay. And let's see what we have. Okay, so we have 49% most interested in examples and benefits of cross-system collaboration. We're planning to talk about that. 30% interested in strategies for reducing multi-systems involvement. We are also planning to talk about that. And 17% interested in the role of cross-system collaborations during COVID-19, 17%, and we'll also talk about that. So I am very excited to go ahead and get started, and I hope that everybody gets what they were hoping for out of this conversation. All right, so for our first question, I wanted to ask everybody to reflect on what are the main lessons of your work on cross-systems collaboration. And so I'll give everybody about 3 minutes to respond. So AshLee, why don't you go ahead and get started? Main lessons of your work on cross-system collaboration.
Yeah, so, with my dissertation research, like I mentioned in the beginning, I interviewed 55 moms who had dual involvement with child protection. Some had criminal justice involvement, and all had the welfare system involvement. And so I found that there were really 3 prominent social and economic consequences for these women. I found labor market burdens, right? So like the inability to get a stable and well-paying job in the formal economy due to this, their involvement in these systems. System avoidance, which is this notion that individuals kind of evade government and non-governmental institutions that have the ability, as one interviewee said, to put them in the system, right? So such as Criminal Justice Institute, CPS, also education systems and healthcare services. And then exasperated material hardships. So all of the women I talked with and many of the families I saw in Hennepin County were families of color and low income, and they already had existing hardships, right? And being involved in these systems really kind of magnified these hardships and had them almost in a feedback cycle where they just couldn't get out of these systems. And so for me, I think the main lesson from my research really suggests that, right, these systems are operating in isolation, but that the consequences of involvement in these systems are interactive and cyclical. And I think when I've talked to those working in the system, I think many people know that, but the question is, well, what do we do about that? And so I'm excited to see, where we go from here. I think, cross-system collaboration is one way to, help these families. And I think that, redefining the policy goals of these systems and making sure that these goals align across systems is one way to do that. So that's a bit about my work. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. I think that's excellent context for hearing from practitioners we have who are doing those kinds of collaborations on the ground. So, Ed, would you like to go ahead and talk about main lessons of your work in Ventura County on cross-system collaboration?
Sure. So our reentry program, and we are talking about the STEPS, which worked with justice-involved adults. In our county, those programs they're all grant-based. So in our proposals, we've had to establish that we did have a cross-system collaboration, and we brought together not only county agencies, but also faith-based and community-based organizations. But when it comes to collaboration, the STEPS program was really based on the partnership between our social services department, which I work with, and our local probation office. no pun intended here, but it did allow us to have a captive audience when it came to clients for the program. So it really helps with probation because they vet the clients that come over to us as referrals, making sure that they are willing to work in our employment services type program. And they also keep them in check. So my team is co-located at the probation offices. So clients can come in when they see their probation officer. They can also see their employment specialist at the same time. It is a voluntary program. We don't make probation force these clients to be part of our program, but it just kind of works together, having probation officers there to kind of nudge them along and say, hey, you want to not go back to jail because it is an anti-recidivism program, then go speak to your employment specialist person. Along with that cross-system collaboration, we also have faith-based organizations that help us if we need, to find them food or need to find them shelter someplace. We work with our county mental health program. We have our behavioral health when it comes to addiction and so forth. So we have a system where we can refer clients out to whatever needs that they have. The problem that I see with this is that unless these partners on paper are given some sort of monetary amount to do the bidding for what the program is meant for, it gets kind of hard because the clients are referred, let's say, to mental health. Well, they're just put in line with everyone else in mental health. I would prefer to have, let's say, $50,000 set aside for mental health. Can you get me 10 beds with this $50,000? And it would be specifically for our programs. We haven't quite got there yet. We do what we can. It's been working great, but the hope is that in future programs that we'll be able to have these more allowable costs to get clients specifically over to residential beds or get them into some sort of housing or even have a job waiting for them, pay for an OJT, which we do have. It's been tough, but we've been very successful in doing that.
Great, thank you. And I just want to clarify for folks who are new to workforce development, OJT is on-the-job training. All right, so Walter and Kwabena, would you like to answer this question for your work in Maryland?
Yes, I'll start.
Yeah.
So this is Walter.
You want me to go first, Walter?
Yes. So I'll say that the issue with us, one of the main lessons learned from us was the significance of having buy-in from our leadership. Again, the way that Maryland is structured, like all the local Department of Social Service agencies falls under the umbrella of the Department of Human Services. But the local departments operate independently, and then you have the Department of Juvenile Services that operates independently. So it was essential for us to come together as local departments as well as the head lead agencies to establish how we were going to collaborate and how best to do it, right? So, but we needed buy-in from our administrative leadership team to do that. So it was important for us to set up leadership implementation teams to be able to reach that goal. And we started planning back in 2013. It took us a year to get to implementation in 2014. But just to place some emphasis on the significance of that leadership buy-in, here we are 7 years later, and we still have the leadership meetings in place, and we're meeting by monthly. Up until COVID-19, having those regular meetings, right? So that was essential for us to get that support, and also the support from the court, right? For us to do any cross collaborative work, we had to have the leadership from our local courts to drive the work, right? So all of our meetings and all of the coordination and logistics stuff is led by the family court in Prince George's County. So the magistrates and judges were leading the work, and we found that was critical to keep everybody together, to tie everybody in, specifically when we knew agencies had their independent goals. Another thing that was important to us was the understanding of each system, right? So you're talking about the courts, who is the glue, the nucleus, but then you have the two systems that that have goals, but some of the goals don't align. Like, for instance, the child welfare piece for which I'm responsible, we're dealing with children in need of assistance, right? And ensuring that the Department of Juvenile Services understood those goals as we worked collaboratively with youth that were involved in both systems. Whereas with the juvenile justice system, they're dealing with delinquency and public safety issues. And we found that our agencies, although aligned, right, there were differences in understanding of what the goals were. So it was important for us to ensure that we trained all of our staff to understand those systems. And fortunately for me, I worked 19 years with the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, so I understood those differences. So when I crossed over into the child welfare system, I took that experience to lead the initiative to educate our staff in regards to that. The last thing I'll talk about is the necessity for us to establish policies and protocols that we instituted to ensure continuity of services and ensure that procedures that were implemented were stable over time, right? So we didn't want to come in and informally put these procedures in place without having written policies, protocols, and procedures to support that. So I'll stop there and allow my colleague to speak further about the work.
Just to kind of add to what Walter just talked about, we had to bring in both staff from both agencies to train them just on the basis of the agencies, because it's always been a question whether a child is the Department of Juvenile Services responsibility or child welfare responsibility. So having a staff understanding each agency's goals and what it is they can do and cannot do, I think was very, very helpful. But we also had to bring in the attorneys on both agencies just to make sure we have an understanding of agency agreement, which allows confidential information to be shared. So that was something that we really needed to do from the beginning.
Great, thank you. Walter, you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's a great segue. My next question here is, during the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing justice-involved families and the systems with which they're involved? So I think we'll do the same structure. AshLee, if you want to start off talking about your research, and then we'll move to the practice side.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I started my interviews like right as the pandemic started. And so for many of the women who had custody of their children, they were really fearful of reentering the child welfare system. And then the ones who had that dual involvement with the criminal justice system, they were also extremely fearful mainly because their loss of income at the start of the pandemic. Most of them were working low-wage jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. And so when they lost their jobs, we had, of course, the CARES Act, and so there was some funding, but that expired, as we know. And then also the lack of childcare for the school-aged children. Most schools went virtual, and these moms are saying, I was working during the time that my kid went to school, and now I can't. My kids are home. And some of the mothers even mentioned, right, the digital divide, right, like kind of like this lack of quality internet access for their kids to complete virtual schooling. So I think that was very interesting to talk with them, during the pandemic. And then for the mothers that still had open case plans, they were concerned about completing their case plans and having those visits with their children. I know different counties have done different things in terms of virtual visits. So I'd be interested to hear from you all in Maryland to see what you all did. But again, this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and so they weren't sure how it was going to affect their current child protection case plans. But yeah, that was my experience.
Great, thank you, AshLee. Ed, would you like to go ahead?
Well, from a program point of view, I think the biggest challenge that we've seen with our clients is just the face-to-face interaction that they've had with their probation officers as well as my staff. We all are struggling just to stay informed or stay engaged with them on the phone or via Skype or Teams or whatever technology we have. The problem being the clients don't necessarily have a computer at home. They don't have access to the technology needed. That being said, my team does the best that they can in staying in contact with clients. Everyone has a cell phone, so we don't use that as an excuse. But it's also hard to find employers who are willing to take a chance on these clients right now. The other partners like behavioral health, our CalWork system, which is our welfare system, our food stamps, they're still staying engaged with the clients, some of which may be mutual clients with the justice involved. But it's, we're just kind of doing what we can out here in California, and I think we're doing a great job. But obviously there's got to be a better way. At the same time, trying to keep people safe, just wear a mask. We tell our clients to make sure we do that, but that can only go so far when it comes to our employment program. Our job centers have been closed this whole time, so everything that we've been doing has been virtual, which is hard because with these clients, the human interaction is really a big part of the engagement and keeping them engaged in our program and what we do. But we're just doing the best we can, like everyone else across the nation.
Thank you. Walter and Kwabena, do you want to talk about Maryland?
So when we initially put processes in place, it was essential for us to do joint assessment and treatment planning, which included joint visits and joint meetings between both agencies. So, Juvenile Services, Department of Juvenile Services have certain criteria for setting up teaming meetings, and then we had the same criteria. So we set up multidisciplinary teams to manage these cross-systems meetings, right? So, of course, when COVID-19 hit, all of that ended in terms of how do we do this face-to-face, right? Like when we first, back earlier during COVID-19, for instance, all face-to-face visits were temporarily suspended unless it was deemed an emergency essential function. Like, for instance, the CPS investigations, we had to do those. We couldn't suspend those. We had to do face-to-face. So we never stopped doing that, but we suspended face-to-face for our children who had a plan of reunification, or our foster care children, through July 2020. So that meant that as agencies, we couldn't do joint visits. Also, you had to factor in that the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services had their own criteria in terms of how those visits should look, when they should resume, and we had our own criteria. Again, I just mentioned that we resumed in July 1, 2020, but that doesn't mean that our partners did the same thing. So that it interrupted our ability to not only just do the face-to-face, but also to virtually plan that joint meeting. So it was disrupted. So, having those joint meetings, we would have to plan virtually, they would have to plan virtually. So so that was initially an issue that we dealt with. Also, the court hearings. When our children, if a child is arrested, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, we have a system in place where we have court liaisons that are contacted, and we share information. So we require agents from both systems to report to these emergency shelter hearings or emergency detention hearings, depending on where the initiation starts. So if we issue limited custody from a child welfare perspective and remove a child, we have an emergency shelter hearing. Then our partners from Juvenile Services, if this child is known to them, they physically were required to come to the meetings, and vice versa. If a child is arrested the night and the next day you have to have an emergency detention hearing, and if the child is known to child welfare, then our staff were reporting to these meetings as well. So we continue to have shelter meetings, but they were done virtually within the court system. So we, trying to collaborate with our sister agency so they can be at these meetings, that's a huge challenge. So all of that got disrupted with COVID-19. But in terms of the identification of cases and the cross-planning, we still do all of that stuff virtually, and I'll let my colleagues speak more about that.
Well, I think so. For the Department of Juvenile Services, we had the same challenges, as you just mentioned, the inability to have the face-to-face contact with the probation officers, the not being able to have a face-to-face contact with service providers, that has been a challenge. Also, we have families that not equipped, for in terms of technology, so that's a challenge. And we do have some families that may have technology, but not, kind of like myself, not quite sure how to use it. So that's also been a challenge. But, you know, we've been able to manage. I think the staff have done a good job in terms of reaching out, you know, via Zoom call, telephone. So any way we can make sure that we have contact with a child has been very crucial. But unfortunately, we have not been able to, you know, do it with a face-to-face contact.
Thank you. All right, so now I want to ask about prevention, and I want to give some background. I'm posing this question based on talking with our team at APT that's working on a project to build evaluation capacity for child welfare community collaboration. So collaborations to link families to preventive services prior to a substantiated child welfare case. So my question is, how can cross-system efforts focus on preventing involvement in the justice and child welfare systems? And I want to add that there could be multiple ways to answer here. So you may either be working with one system to prevent involvement in another, or have a third system or agency working to prevent involvement in both. So I'm so interested to hear perspective on this. I know we have folks from that project on the line, and I think we also have folks from the third sector who are working on similar prevention projects across sectors. So I think there's a lot of interest in the answer here. So AshLee, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I guess my broad take on this is that I really think if systems are going to work together, we really need to start with reimagining our purpose and goals, right? I think in child protection, especially, it's important to note that, you know, over 70% of the cases of maltreatment are due to neglect. And, you know, neglect is really a definition that is frequently conflated with poverty, right? The official guidelines, right? A failure of a parent or other person to provide needed food, clothing, shelter, medical care. And so right there you have a definition that really, you know, singled out low-income families because of their socioeconomic status. And so I think, you know, these systems really need to interrogate their policy goals, right? And that, you know, of course, as others have mentioned in the panel already, like these policy goals in these systems are already inherently different. So if we're going to reform these systems and really focus on cross-system collaboration, we need to look at, again, how they intersect, right, and how they're combining to impact the lives of these families. I think, you know, focusing on prevention, for one, taking like a two-generation approach, right, that really focuses on building family well-being by being intentional and working with both the children and the adults is one way to do that. And I know there are some programs throughout the country that are doing pilot programs with that. And then, you know, the prevention programs that have been found to have some positive effects, of course, have been, right, like home visiting programs, respite and crisis care for families. When I talked to many of the moms in my study, many of them mentioned that like they had no child care even before the pandemic, and that would have been super helpful to them. And then, of course, in child protection, you know, placing children with kin relatives rather than foster families. RAND did a study in 2018, and they found that, you know, doing all these things really drove down episodes of maltreatment and saved the child protection system billions of dollars.
Great. Thank you, AshLee. And I'll find that RAND study and put it in the chat window because it's a good one, and I think people should take a look at it. Ed, do you want to go ahead and talk about your answer to this question from Ventura County?
Sure. So the cross system, again, for our program being our social services, employment services department with law enforcement. In this case, for the STEPS program, it's probation. So the social service department, which is us, which provides the employment services program, that is the preventing program that's put in to fight recidivism, because it is the grant that we got is an anti-recidivism grant. So our efforts in keeping them out of jail is to see if we can get them a job, get them skills to stay out of jail. Now, what we have found, though, in the last 9 years is that you need to take a more holistic approach. And that's why you have the other partners from the community that need to be involved. We have found that someone who just comes out of jail and is on probation doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready for a job. And we found that out early in the programs. They've got other issues, where they're going to get their next meal, where they're going to stay. We found that it's helpful to get them out of the environment in which they got themselves in trouble. And that's hard to do also, especially when you have a limited grant that really is specifically focused on getting them job skills and employment. But it's a holistic approach that you've got to take, because perhaps they do have a family that they also have to take care of. Addiction is a big thing. We can't get someone a job if they're addicted to something. We can't even get them to come visit us if they're busy, partying with their friends. We've also found that once we do find work for a client, they take that money and go party with some old friends. They go right back to where they were. So that's another step that we had to find, that we can intervene and keep them engaged and keep them on the right path. So, the efforts of our system with behavioral health, with our faith-based, with our community-based, it's been really great, but a lot of it hinges on what the client wants to do. And, we can do all the assessments that we want. We can give all the resources for the client to do good, but really it's a behavioral thing that needs to be changed with the client. They need to start thinking differently in order to stay on the right path, and that's what we found.
Thank you. And I'm going to have a follow-up question about that when we get to Q&A based on some work that APT has been doing on employment services for folks with substance use disorders. I'm just going to put a pin in that.
I'll be
Walter
here.
and Kwabena, do you want to talk about this for Maryland?
So I'll say when we began this work back in 2013, the one thing that we recognized, and again, this was based on research done by the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown, was that children that are involved in both systems are less likely to graduate from high school, are more likely to be arrested, are more likely to be detained, are more likely to get arrested and go to court, and that's likely to achieve permanency, right? So the work that we were doing is centered around where are we in terms of assessing the success of our program based on those measures, right? And I'll just use one example. Since 2014, we've identified 170 youth that had some sort of cross-system involvement. So again, the child is arrested and has child welfare, is involved in the child welfare system. So of that 170 children since 2014, 44% of those children have gone on to court, and 66% of those children, right, 94 of the 170 have been diverted from court involvement. That number was higher before we started our collaborative efforts between the two sister agencies and the court. And that's the one thing that the court has mentioned time and time again, is that collaborative planning from the earliest point has helped in respect to these young people not being pushed further into the court system. So that information sharing has been critical for us in the ability to do that and then cross-manage these cases. We created a one court, one youth model, right? So if the child is known to the juvenile justice system, and then subsequently a Senate petition is filed for that child, then the juvenile court judge will manage that case, right? We consider those Pathway 2 cases. Pathway 1 cases, the cases we see more of, these are children that are involved in child welfare that are arrested, right? And that's primarily maybe 90% of that, 95% of that 170 children were in that category. So the child court judge will process these cases. So the delinquency court, we created a bench book with the court that identifies the processes and procedures of identifying these cases and keeping these cases with one judge for the life of the case. And that was critical. Again, it cut down on the duplication of services, and it ensured that decisions were being made by that one judge to implement services that are in the best interests of those children, regardless of what system that case initiated in, and to create that continuity and delivery of services. So it translated into better services for crossover youth and their families in Prince George's County. And we've seen promising numbers in regards to that. More children are likely to receive joint treatment service plans. More children are likely to have joint visits. More children are likely to have one continuous program and service established and put into place for them. So, I just wanted to focus on that and just highlight some of those promising practices. I'll stop there and let my colleague pick up on some of the stuff that we've done.
Well, we put a protocol in place just to ensure we have a better communication with child welfare. So at the point of arrest, we submit the names of those juveniles to child welfare. And if that juvenile is child welfare involved, we get the information about the social worker, foster care parent, and when we have that information, we invite them to our intake conference. So in the state of Maryland, we have an intake conference for all juveniles who have been arrested. And at the intake conference, we have one of three options. We can close the case and give that juvenile a warning. We can put the case on pre-court supervision, give the juvenile conditions in lieu of going to court. Or we can forward the case to the state attorney's office, and then ultimately it gets to court. And the reason why we bring child welfare involved is that if that juvenile is in fact child welfare involved and receiving services, we want to ensure that we're not duplicating services. We also want to make sure that if there's a need to even send a case to court. And because of that, we have prevent sending so many cases to court because, child welfare will come in and let us know what type of services the juvenile is receiving. So it's very crucial that, that at the point of arrest, that we involve child welfare so that they know every step of the way. And then if the case actually do go to court, we invite child welfare for a meeting. So at the final disposition, it's not just a recommendation for the Department of Juvenile Services, it's a recommendation of Department of Juvenile Services and child welfare. So we want to make sure, again, that we're not duplicating services.
Thank you. And for our last question, let's step back and think big. AshLee, you started to get into this, but I want to hear more from you and additional thoughts from everybody else. What is your wish list for reforms to better support justice-involved families?
Yeah, I think the biggest, broadest thing I can think of is, having social policies that really address deeper structural issues, which, I know many social workers are talking about that currently and with child protection, and we've heard about, police reform, but we really need to address, I think, these crucial issues of poverty, racism, and substance abuse and mental health issues in our country. Those to me are the things that, at least in my research, that the women all suffered from. And so I think maybe some more practical suggestions or wishes for reform would be, removing barriers to employment and income assistance for, parents, formerly incarcerated parents, right? Some states still have felony bans on social supports like TANF. And of course, increasing TANF benefits to a living wage would help. Also, I think, the women I talked to who had this dual involvement with criminal justice and child protection, a lot of them, they couldn't find housing, right? And, removing these barriers to public as well as private housing, I think for parents with criminal records is essential, because if you can't find a shelter for yourself, you can't find one for your child either. And ultimately, their parental rights were terminated. And so to me, those are the two kind of things that I think practically could be done. And then, of course, broadly, I really do hope one day we can use social policies to really address these deeper structural issues.
Thank you. All right, Ed, your wish list?
I just want to echo what Ms. Smith said. She's absolutely right. again, looking holistically at the justice-involved population. We're trying to keep them out of jail by allowing them to get skills and get a job, yet we find that there's addiction involved, there's homelessness involved. And again, they don't know where they're going to get their next meal sometimes. So I think we need to start looking at that, because a lot of the clients that we have they do have addiction issues. That's a big thing. But these grants are really just focused on getting them a job. Well, again, you can't get them a job if they're thinking about something else, if they got other problems they got to deal with. Homelessness is another one. But in this world that's so changing, especially in our country, all of those reforms that people are talking about, those will help with justice-involved clients. So I'm just hoping that we do have a brighter day ahead of us starting January 20th.
Great, thank you. Maryland, wish list?
So I know that when you look at how juvenile justice and child welfare systems operate nationally, right, you'll see a variety of different organizational structures, right? So I know, for instance, in the state of Delaware, they have one family system for which the child welfare and delinquency cases, organizational structures fall under. In Maryland, we have 24 different counties in the state of Maryland, so that means we have 24 different local departments of social services, although we operate under the umbrella of the Department of Human Services, right? But these systems operate independently, and I know that the State Department of Juvenile Services is one system, and they're committed, as well as DHS, is committed to having cross-systems approach put into place. But it's difficult to get there, right? And again, like I said, in 2013, we started. We didn't implement until 2014. A lot of it had to do with the legal issues with what information can be shared, how best to share that information without violating any confidentiality law. So the attorneys representing all these agencies worked months and months and months to come up with these agreements. Unfortunately, in some jurisdictions, it takes forever and it might not get done. So I think that in terms of a wish list, right, I think that local departments or local agencies need to consider one structure, right, and a holistic approach where you may have a Department of Family Services where everything is under one organizational umbrella. And I think that that'll help to create this system where these cases can be managed, because, in the end, you'll have one seamless system, and the leadership team will be able to make decisions to push and enforce the necessity of working with these children collaboratively and the benefits of having a cross-systems approach without all the bureaucracy that typically interferes with the success of these endeavors.
And if I had to add on to it, I would say that if I had a wish list, it would be having an evidence-based service provider that deals specifically for these crossover youth. I think they're unique, in terms of how they get into the system. So we have one service provider that works directly with those population. I think that would be, something that's needed.
Great, thank you all. So we have a little over half an hour for audience questions, and if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the window and I'll read it aloud. As we're waiting for those to come in, I want to come back to the topic that came up earlier that's continued to resurface throughout the remarks of everybody on the panel, which is the issue of addressing substance use disorders. So what I want to ask about is that, we've been talking about cross-systems collaboration, thinking about systems, but I also want to ask about the role of individual programs, including treatment providers and recovery services, and how you've seen examples of engaging those kinds of providers in cross-system collaboration.
So, Hannah, is that for the panel to respond?
Yeah, I think we'd love to hear from anybody who has thoughts on this. I think this is an issue that's coming up on multiple conversations about addressing barriers to employment is the issue of substance use disorder. So anybody who has anything to share on engaging treatment and recovery providers and when and how to do that, I think would be of a lot of interest.
Well, it's been tough for us here in California. I mean, our systems have been overburdened, as the rest of the country. But we just keep trudging on. We have our mental health department, our behavioral health department, and any other community-based organization that can help with these issues. We just try to leverage their services as best we can. But it's hard because our clients are really just put in line when referred to these entities. Again, I had said that it would be helpful to have money set aside for them to put our clients in front of the line, but we're not allowed to do that right now. But that being said, all of our resources and our partners, they're doing the best they can to serve this population. So we do what we can.
All right. Anybody else?
So I'll say locally for us, we formed a partnership with the Prince George's County Health Department, and we have the substance abuse folks that work specifically with children and families. We formed a partnership where they actually work within our office space, right? So we have them there with us to make referrals, to do assessments, to do urinalysis testing, et cetera, right? So we were able to forge that relationship. But typically what they do is, they broker out for outpatient services and inpatient services. And, systemically, that's always an issue, trying to find those type of services for the youth population, because the outpatient beds, inpatient beds are limited in the state of Maryland. And I'm quite sure that that's the case nationally for folks in the struggle. But at least we were able to establish that relationship with our local health department to at least be a resource for us to do the initial assessments and testing and work with us to try to broker services for these families. And of course, for our crossover youth, our cross-system youth, they'll benefit from those same services based on the relationships that we formed. We have a multidisciplinary team in Prince George's County that we established based on the work that we've done since 2013, for which the health department is a part of it, for which local providers, including some substance abuse programs, they're a part of it. And as Mr. Tuffour indicated earlier, that when we make recommendations to the court, we do joint recommendations at the disposition hearing based on one treatment service plan. And all of our providers are at the table at the room. Do we have adequate services? I'm going to say we can always use more services, but at least, we've created that multidisciplinary team to be in the room to discuss mental health, to discuss substance abuse, and to be able to engage in those discussions and find services and make recommendations as far as the service plans for us and the treatment service plans on the delinquency side, and have that joint recommendation in place.
Great, thank you. Would anybody else like to respond? Okay. Another issue that I've heard coming up in several of your remarks is the issue of funding and funding flexibility. Can you talk about what the kind of flexibility to braid funding or combine these services might look like, and how that would help you in your work?
Well, I'll start. All of our reentry programs were originally grant-based, and only a few have been picked up to be fully funded each year once the grant ended. But again, we're limited in terms of what we can spend our money on. It's got to be employment related. It's got to be skills related. For training, we do have money for incentives if clients reach milestones, and for supportive services. But the supportive services are really for ancillary items, tools, clothes, test fees, things like that, but we can't use the money specifically for housing or for mental health issues, addiction, and that's been a little disconnect that we're trying to get around. Now, again, we get around that by leveraging resources and other services from our partner agencies, but again, the money isn't there to put them in the front of the line. But we are trying to make strides here. Our program has spawned a youth program as well, so we are working with juveniles also in the same way that we're working with adults who are on probation, and we go to the juvenile justice facility that we have here in Ventura County. We work with kids there, so that's our preventive measure. But again, we are kind of limited in the amount of money that we have based on the grants and with what we're allowed to spend.
Thank you. Anybody else on funding?
So this is Walter from Prince George's County. When we initially implemented our initiative, we worked with the Maryland Judiciary Foster Care Improvement Court Project, and they sustained funding for us via a grant for us to work with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University to be able to, implement the model, to support the research for the model, et cetera. So that was initially the startup for us, was through that grant money. But as far as each agency and the supports, we use in-kind services. We didn't hire new caseworkers. We just incorporated the work into our current infrastructure, and at least for the Prince George's County Department of Social Services.
And I would say the same thing for the Department of Juvenile Services. We actually didn't do anything different. So that I don't think, that was never an issue in terms of the funding.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Deborah Solomon at Third Sector Capital Partners, which helps government agencies use data to improve client outcomes. And Deborah would like to hear about challenges and opportunities that everybody has seen around data sharing across systems.
So of course, as I alluded to earlier in regards to sharing information and sharing data, right? So we had to get the Attorney General's office for the state of Maryland assigned to each agency to come together at the table to draft protocols, procedures, and confidentiality agreements to allow us to share information. And we did that at the local level as well with our attorneys that work specifically with our agency. So all the attorneys work together in terms of that. But in terms of data collection, part of the agreement through the grant that we received through the Maryland Judiciary Foster Care Court Improvement Project was a research piece attached to it. And the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform did the research for us in regards to the outcome measures for our programming for the first couple years. And then they connected us with a researcher at Howard University to continue that work to date. Right, so that was sort of where we are in terms of collecting data. So we started with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. We were given the data, like our local agencies were given the data to the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. And again, it was based on the work that was done by the attorneys, putting mechanisms in place to allow us to do that. And we transitioned that to Howard University with their researcher from there who worked with us. And we didn't fund that continuation of work. Howard University came to us and say, hey, we would like to continue collecting this information on crossover. We've been working with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. We'll use it for research, not providing any information relative to children. Can we do this? So it worked for us, and I'm certain that the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform created and fostered those relationships across all the states that had implemented their model to have local universities to continue that work, as long as the information wasn't being shared specific to children and youth. So that's where we were. So again, it was the initial requirement as part of that grant, and then linking with the local university to continue data collection.
For our justice-involved programs, our reentry programs, we rely on our data to further validate the evidence-based approach that we take in these grants. All of these grants that we receive for our reentry population has been evidence-based. And our law enforcement agencies, whether it be our sheriff's department or our probation offices, they use that, again, because they're anti-recidivism programs. And we have to make sure that the work that we do, that we continue to do, is in fact decreasing the recidivism program, the recidivism rate. So, it also lends itself for the justice-involved folks to see exactly what we need to address with them, what their needs are, what works and what doesn't work. So at least that's what I hope all the data that I've been providing each month is helping to do. But that's pretty much right now, at least at my level, what data does for us.
Great, thank you. So another question that's come in is, what suggestions would you give on how to engage somebody in a social services agency when that person is recently released and has many restrictions due to their charge?
So I think that one's for me too. So we issue, let me see how to answer that. We deal with that every day. We really do. It's been tough dealing with the barriers that a client who just has been released. It's really tough to then have to meet measurements of why didn't you get them job skills or why didn't you get them a job when they first come out, and again, they don't know where to go. They don't have a support system. They've got mental health issues or they have addiction issues. But again, we do what we can with the partners that we have in our cross system. We can make referrals to our behavioral health. We can use some of our supportive services money to maybe get them a hotel room for the day, or even buy them food. Just any little piece of hope that we can give them to keep them engaged with us is what we do. We have incentive programs, and we tell them, if you just come meet us once you get out for the first time, we'll give you $50 just to get you started. That tends to work, at first, but then it gets really tough because we don't have anything else to offer them for the issues that they may have at hand. But that being said, we just do the best we can with these clients and just try to stay engaged with them. COVID doesn't help, of course, but we're dispatched to do whatever we can do for the clients. But it does get tough.
So as I indicated earlier, right, and when we were talking about like lessons learned, I wanted to stress the importance of leadership being at the table, right? So in the chief administrative judge for courts in Prince George's County is on board. So you have the judges for family court, you have the judges for delinquency court, but the chief administrative judge say, hey, we need to do this. We need to create this one court, one youth model and push that. So in addition to that, you have the secretary from each lead agency, from the Department of Human Services, as well as the Department of Juvenile Services, those secretaries stating that, hey, as agencies or departments, we need to work together, right? And then at the local level, our director stated that, hey, this is something that we need to do. So the key to bringing all the right people to the table is to get the buy-in from the lead administrative heads, and then that pushes down into the organization, because we face that resistance. And again, I use the example that there's 24 counties in the state of Maryland that operate Department of Social Services independently. So that's harder to get all 24 jurisdictions on board. Whereas if you have a system that's one, like the Department of Juvenile Services, you have one person making that decision. But again, if you have the right people at the table, you have all the administrative leadership folks in place, and then you develop teams to be able to work together and then create policies and procedures to support that initiative, then that's a way to try to get everybody at the table and on board. And I speak idealistically, optimistically, but again, it took us 1 year to get to where we needed to be. So those are real challenges.
Thank you. Our next question is, I just love how all the questions that are coming in are a good mix of research and practice, just like the conversation we're having. So next question is that recidivism is typically the most common long-term outcome measured, but what are some short-term indicators that your programs track?
Well, for our programs, because we're an employment specialist, employment services program, we have measurements that are equal to the WIOA program, the Welfare Innovation and Opportunities Act program. We track their employment. We track their job skills attainment. We also do the social services thing and check on them to see how they're doing in their family life. So it's a holistic approach that we take. My team doesn't necessarily track the recidivism rate for our program, though I do that just kind of as an administrative thing. But as long as they stay out of jail, and we do follow up about 6 months once they're exited from the program. We just kind of do that to make sure that they're still on the straight and narrow. It hasn't all been successful. Obviously there is a recidivism rate that we still battle, but just the successes of our clients, and just to know that we've given them hope, to know that they know that there's a better way in their life and that they're following that path. That's really what we tend to follow. I can't really give you recidivism rates here in Ventura County. It's probably equal to what it is nationwide, and obviously we don't deal with every single client who has been justice involved, but I can say from some prior programs that our recidivism rate, just with the clients that we've had, has never been over 20%. So if that's a success, if you deem that a success, thank goodness. But really, we track them holistically. We track them in terms of employment, job skills attainment, and how they're doing in terms of staying out of jail.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts from Maryland on short-term indicators?
Yeah, I would say this, though. For us, we've been able to divert many juveniles from being court involved with the Department of Juvenile Services, from knowing from the early stages that there are DSS involved in receiving services, which, let us know that they may not be in need to send a case to court to get services. Also, having the same judge to hear the Senate cases and the delinquency cases also has been really helpful. The judge have a good understanding of the child and their families. So there have been times where there was no need to place that juvenile on probation. So I think, having that one judge model has been really helpful. And I think it has prevented a lot of kids from penetrating to both systems.
Thank you. Ashley, I'm also curious if you have thoughts on what short-term and long-term indicators should be tracked.
Yeah, I think with the moms I talked to who were duly involved, a lot of them had multiple occurrences in the justice system. And so I think just like Ed mentioned, tracking, are they getting employment? Do they have safe and stable housing? Kind of like just the normal well-being measures would be helpful, and not just focus on, 3 years after they get out, and to see if they return to prison or not.
Thank you. The next question we have, Ed, is a follow-up for you, asking specifically about suggestions for social services agencies trying to place people in employment when there's restrictions on the kinds of jobs that they can have due to their record. So things like not being able to work with youth or not being able to work in healthcare settings or things like that.
Well, we do have to keep those things in mind, but we do have money in our grant budgets that allow for on-the-job training, OJTs. And we, in the STEPS program, have a position, or we have a team member known as an account executive who's really just a job developer. And this job developer goes out and into the community, cold calls, knocks on doors with employers to try to convince them to take a chance on our justice-involved clients, those who are obviously ready to work. We try to incentivize their taking a chance on our clients. We get them federally bonded, for these clients, and we pay up to 50% of the wage that they would hand out to, or they would give to the client if they give them a chance. And that's limited to a certain amount of hours, obviously, but we have found that this has been a very successful way of employing our clients who have barriers or who have issues. It also allows the employer world to see that these clients are okay. These clients have paid their debt to society. These clients are willing to work. Now, I will say that it hasn't worked perfectly, but at least it's given us a chance to, get these justice-involved clients out there. We prepare our clients by telling them, to own up to what they've served time for. I know that we're in the ban the box era here. Applications don't ask for prior convictions and things like that, but we still tell the clients to be forthright with it, to own it, because there's always going to be a background check. And there's nothing worse, and we found there's nothing worse to get through everything. The candidate is fantastic. The employer loves them. Then all of a sudden they do a background check and say, oh, why didn't you mention this? And everything falls apart. So we pride ourselves in telling our clients to just come forth with it, own it. Let the employer who's willing to take a chance on you, prove to them that you are trustworthy, and that's a really big barrier that we have. But the word gets out, and we get more employers who come in and want to take a chance on clients, and it's been very helpful. It's been really successful.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, how have you approached the challenge with data sharing and transparency when service providers and system partners are not able to access each other's data systems?
Oh, for us, it's a tough one. We do have our confidentiality policies here in the county. We only share high-level information numbers. We don't, unless we have an MOU with a partner, we're not going to share any information. We can't. The STEPS program, we work with probation. So probation, they have access to our files, but we don't necessarily have access to theirs because the probation office has their different, their confidentiality policies as well. But because we are a subcontract with the probation office, then our files are their files, but it doesn't work the same way. That's why I really couldn't speak on recidivism. We don't even ask. It's not an eligibility, a condition of eligibility to find out what their offense is. That's really not on us to find out. The probation knows what their offense is. It's up to them to then vet them out and then let us know that this client is a good fit for our program. So we don't really share our confidential information. We send out reports, and I send them to to our sponsor, who then sends them to whoever they need to because of our grant requirements, but other than that, we don't really, I'm not privy to share information, for instance, with a CBO who on paper is a partner, but in an MOU they are not. So it's very confidential here.
Interesting. Thank you. What about in Maryland?
So now, we're sharing information via communication with key points and people that we've identified. And again, we've created the agreements to allow us to share that information. But on a bigger forum, we've created in Maryland a new database and new information system that's going to be jointly shared by both agencies. So this is a huge initiative that started with push from the governor here in Maryland. It's called MD Think. And this system is called the Child Juvenile Adult Management System, CJAMS, right? And so prior to this model, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services had its own database system. We had our own database system. Now these agencies will share the same information system in CJAMS, right? So we've already implemented the CJAMS system in Maryland, the Department of Human Services and the local Department of Social Services. So we've already implemented, we went live during COVID-19 in terms of this system, right? Mainly because it was a web-based system, and it was easier for us to do that than to have these systems where we had to be hardwired into a network. So CJAMS is a web-based system. At some point, and I don't know, and maybe Mr. Tuffour can speak to that, at some point, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services is going to go live with the same system, right? So we'll all be in the same system, and then those provisions that were created to allow us to share information, there'll be provisions put into place, there'll be restrictions, and there'll be, like the notices that we send now that, hey, we have a child that was arrested last night, we have a shelter hearing that's coming. There'll be ticklers going to both systems to be able to provide that information once we are all in this system. So that's a huge, huge monumental endeavor for the state of Maryland to have two agencies with the same juvenile adult management system and using the same database. So we're there now, and Juvenile Services will be there hopefully in the near future in terms of going live with using that system.
I think we're scheduled to go live sometime in 2021.
Great. So let's see, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I'm seeing a lot of great resources shared. So I want to just draw attention to them. The first one that I've dropped in the chat window here is the idea, the issue of homelessness has come up in a couple of the questions that we've discussed. And so this is a resource shared for each county's coordinated entry system for helping people who are experiencing homelessness access emergency shelter and permanent housing. So there's these continuum of care leads for each community in the country, and so there's a link up here. And I see that there's, this is great. There's another resource here that's an example of homelessness and justice system data matching for care coordination. So I've just dropped the link for that in the chat. I'll just wait another minute for any further questions. And while I'm doing that, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to just share if there's anything we haven't talked about that they want to make sure that the audience walks away with. So AshLee, would you like to go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure. I guess from my point of view and with the clients that I've worked with, they're not bad people, right? Like they are people who have usually fallen on hard times or have suffered some trauma. And so I think it's important to remember when working with these populations to listen to them and to really empathize with them as much as you can as you're trying to help improve their lives. So that's my big takeaway.
Great, thank you. Ed, what about you?
Well, we continue to try new ways to engage the justice-involved population. We're about to relaunch another program where we will engage with with the incarcerated client, be in jail before they get out, just to let them know what's available out there. And we had this program about 2 years ago, and it was really successful, but the money ran out because it was a grant. It was grant funded. This one deals with or works with the county jail, which is our sheriff's department, and the trick is to work with them on the inside, let them know what's available out there, get them to think which road they need to take, and then hopefully once they get out, we'll be waiting for them on the outside to further along their positive ways. So we're looking to launch that sometime late next month. But it has shown in the past that it is successful. It's just a matter of what we can do with the clients once they're out. The barriers continue to be problematic in terms of what we can pay for and what we can't pay for. But again, we're just doing the best we can.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to drop a link in the chat to some resources on the program that you just mentioned that you had funded previously. Maryland, so Walter, what would you like folks to walk away with from today's conversation?
So I'll say that, it's critical that we create cross systems to be able to work with children that are involved in both child welfare and delinquency. Many of these children have the same issues. Most of them are teetering along the lines of either delinquent involvement or child welfare involvement based on dysfunctional family situations as the drive, right? So for those that are involved in child welfare, the majority of the referrals that we received are for neglect, which have to do with mental health, domestic abuse, substance abuse, et cetera, right? And these kids are the same kids that end up crossing into the delinquency realm or the child welfare realm. So it's important for us to work together and understand that these children have the same needs and that we could be more beneficial in addressing these needs and fixing these systems problems or the family issues that these children have if we work jointly and collaboratively together. So Kwabena and I are both are part of a statewide committee in regards to cross-systems youth in the state of Maryland. Again, the model has been implemented that we're using in several counties, but the goal and push is for it to be implemented in 24 counties. And I know now that a toolkit has been established, best practices based on the work that we've done in Prince George's County as well as Montgomery County, which Kwabena is also involved with. And we're pushing the work in other jurisdictions based on our involvement in the state committee.
And I would just add that since the implementation, we have so much better communication with child welfare DSS. The information sharing goes a long way. We have caseworkers doing joint case management, working together. There's been times where both caseworkers would visit the juvenile at home, even in placement. We've had scheduled bi-weekly meetings to ensure that we are working together. So overall, I would say that it's been great. The communication has been great. But I think overall, having that one judge is crucial, because that judge have a good understanding of what is going on with that child. And so that's very important. So we have trying to implement this model across the state of Maryland. And we almost there, but Prince George's County was the first county to do so. So overall, we have seen some great success. So I would say that if you have a chance to implement this model, you should definitely go ahead and do that.
Great, thank you. I think that's a wonderful note to end on because I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat. So I want to first thank our panelists for sharing their expertise and experience. I think this has been a really rich conversation, and I think we've had a lot of good examples shared from folks in the audience in the chat. So all of the materials from this webinar you'll receive in an email afterwards, and I'll see if we can include some of these links on the landing page where the recording and the slides will be. So I think I'll just go ahead and thank NARS for supporting this, Jean and David for IT support, and I'll give everybody 5 minutes back in their day. So thank you so much for logging in.